Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. And so far, the class of Rogue has seen fantastic performance during the early days in the new season content of the patch 10.1, with the spec of Subtlety leading the charge. This ambusher playstyle has gained a ton of popularity since this most recent content update, quickly becoming the go-to playstyle in single-target boss encounters, AoE-focused Mythic Plus dungeons, and they still retain a competitive edge within PvP. Safe to say that Subtlety is a fantastic all-around rogue spec, capable of performing well in all forms of endgame content, which resulted in their rising popularity. I spent a lot of the time so far playing my rogue during Season 2, focusing most of my attention on exploring the Outlaw as well as the playstyle of Subtlety, and I thought it would be a good idea to put together an up-to-date guide. If you are a new player and plan on checking out the class of Rogue for the very first time, or are a returning player come back for the patch 10.1 and are looking to dust off your old main, then this video will go over everything you need in order to get started playing Subtlety Rogue when it comes to PvE content in the Season 2 of Dragonflight. But right before we get into this update guide video, most of you guys watching these videos are still not subscribed. However, the more of you are mine, the more of you do, so let's keep it going. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell if you're watching these videos anyway, especially if you want to get more regular content regarding all of the newest Dragonflight updates and changes going forward. I usually prefer to start off these videos by covering the class talents and viable builds first, starting with the Subtlety Rogue starter build. This build is perfect for any returning players thinking of playing Rogue for the patch 10.1. Most Rogue builds will prioritize group utility, either in a form of numbing or atrophic poison, which reduces enemies' effectiveness. All Subtlety Rogues will focus on expanding their finisher's value, empowering their strongest attacks with cold blood, and fueling their energy with docility during Shadow Dance. The Subtlety base build leans into Secret Technique, which makes up a large portion of the overall damage, Dance Macabre, which sharpens your Shadow Dance windows, and Flagellation, which amplifies your mastery. Though Flagellation can be replaced with Dark Brew if you prefer a more passive type of playstyle. This change will slightly reduce your overall damage, but can be much easier to get value from if you struggle managing with all of Subtlety's cooldowns. Once you get your hands on the Subtlety's newest tier set, your single target build changes slightly. The tier set will greatly empower your core ability of Symbols of Death, so we will be picking up the crit talent of Planned Execution and Inevitability to prolong the Symbols uptime. In AoE content like Mythic Plus dungeons, we will maintain a familiar build, though with a handful of changes. First, we'll prioritize our ability to cleave onto nearby targets, and empower our AoE burst windows with talents like Shuriken Tornado. Now that we got the talents out of the way, let's go over how to gear and itemize your rogue for the patch 10.1. If you're serious about maximizing your rogue, then I highly suggest using raid bot sims to help you better optimize your gear. Simcraft has an add-on which can snag all of your character's items. This means your current equipment as well as anything left sitting in your bags. Raid bots can help you compare all available items and find out which pieces may be your biggest upgrade. You can even compare and find out which items are worth upgrading using crests and flight stones, and even simulate different scenarios to find out just how much damage you should be doing against bosses, dungeon encounters, and even when simply hitting a training dummy. Though if you're looking for a simple gearing advice, then this is how you should get started. Subtlety's best stat will be Agility, and most items that provide you more of it will generally be your biggest upgrade. Your secondary stat priority will start with Critical Strike, followed by Versatility, which is incredibly close to Mastery in value, and you'll want to avoid the stat of Haste as much as possible. Your best weapon will come from the final boss of Aberrus, wielding the Fang of Sundered Flame in both hands. If you gear through dungeons, then the Croaking Dagger will be your priority, which comes from Halls of Infusion, or potentially the Hard-Piercing Stalactite from the Instance of Underrot. If you are raiding, your best trinkets will be the Beacon to the Beyond from Sarkareth, and the Dragonfire Bombs from the Vigilant Steward encounter. In dungeons, you'll want to be on the lookout for the Harlan's Loaded Dice from Freehold, or the Mark of Dark Rule from Neltharian's Lair. Once you get your hands on the Subtlety 4-set bonus, your character will significantly grow in power, and it should be a priority to acquire this tier set as soon as possible. With your 2-set, Shadow Dance will automatically activate Symbols of Death, and will slightly prolong your periodic damage effects. Your 4-set amplifies your damage. While Symbols of Death is active, all Eviscerate and Black Powder crits become 40% more effective. Slaying raid bosses is a viable method of tier set acquisition, but filling out your Great Vault through raids, dungeons, and even PvP can offer even more chances at tier set items. And in a few weeks, we'll be able to use Catalyst to convert normal Season 2 gear from raids and dungeons into a tier set versions on a weekly basis. Next, let's go over the Subtlety Rogue playstyle. For the most part, there isn't really a set rotation for Subtlety. Rather, the spec is a priority system of builders and spenders. This changes slightly with the new rules established inside of your Shadow Dance windows. Gloomblade, which is a talented version of Backstab, will be your primary single target builder. It generates 1 combo point and will be a main ability cast outside of Shadow Dance windows. Shadow Strike will generate 3 combo points and will be your priority builder against 1 or 2 targets whenever Stealth or Shadow Dance is active. Shuriken Storm will be your primary AoE combo point builder, which generates a combo point for every target it hits. We will use Shuriken against 2 or more targets outside of Shadow Dance or against 3 or more targets inside of Shadow Dance windows. Up next, we have finishers, which will spend our combo points to either buff our combat effectiveness, bleed our targets, or strike our enemies with some of our most powerful abilities. Try to use finishers when you're about to cap out on combo points. Outside of dances, it is advised to use finishers at 6 or more combo points, and inside of dance, it is advised to use finishers at 5 or more combo points. Rupture is a bleed finisher, which deals damage over time. Under normal conditions, you should try to maintain Rupture at all times on as many targets as possible, but try to use Rupture mostly outside of your Shadow Dance windows. Slice and Dice is a finisher which enhances our auto attacks. Try to maintain Slice and Dice at all times in all combat situations. Eviscerate will be your primary single target finisher. When Rupture and Slice and Dice do not need to be refreshed, we'll be using Eviscerates against 1 or 2 targets. Black Powder is your AoE finisher, and just like Eviscerate, when other buffs and debuffs are active, we'll be using Black Powder against 3 or more targets. Finally, we have Secret Technique, which is a powerful, talented finisher that cleaves all nearby targets. We will be using Secret Technique only inside of your Shadow Dance windows, so save this one until the perfect moment to maximize its output. And I will go over how to properly use Secret Technique inside of Shadow Dance windows in just a moment. Next, I want to go over how to properly utilize Subtlety's massive list of offensive cooldowns, starting with Symbols of Death. Symbols is a buff which enhances your damage and generates you energy. Generally, we try to use it as often as possible during combat, keeping it almost always on cooldown. With a 2-set tier set bonus, we can delay Symbols until a later use whenever a free proc of Symbols is already active. Shadow Dance enhances our combat skills, letting us access stealth abilities like Shadow Strike, which deal additional damage. Generally, we try to use Shadow Dance on cooldown as much as possible, while following a very specific rotation to maximize its effectiveness. Shadow Blades enhances our combat abilities with bonus shadow damage, and causes our builders to generate additional combo points. As with all the other abilities, we'll try to use Shadow Blades on cooldown. Just like Shadow Dance, Vanish grants us a moment of stealth, letting us use 1 stealth-based ability. The ability of Vanish will have a very specific use during your opener. Otherwise, we'll try to use it on cooldown outside of our Shadow Dance windows. Next, we have Subtlety, which empowers us with additional energy while raising our mastery. In most cases, we'll save charges of Subtlety to use inside of Shadow Dance windows whenever we require energy. The talent of Flagellation should be used on cooldown as much as possible, usually right before we spend combo points into a finisher to maximize on its mastery additional value. The cooldown of Cold Blood causes your next ability to become a guaranteed critical strike. We'll be using Cold Blood right before we cast a Secret Technique to maximize its effectiveness. Next, we have Shuriken Tornado. When activated, the rogue will automatically cast 4 Shuriken Storms in a row, which can be filled with finishers in between of each cast. Generally, it's best to use Shuriken Tornado on cooldown or save it until you hit a big trash bag in dungeons. Because the ability is so energy expensive, we try to use Shuriken Tornado together with Symbols of Death. Next, we have the Subtlety Rogue Openers, which will help you establish all of your buffs, enemy debuffs, and maximize your damage at the start of an encounter. First, we have Single Target Openers, which use First Dance as a talent. During this opener, you'll start with a Shadow Strike followed by any unused trinket, into a Shadow Blades as well as a Backstab, followed by Flagellation if you're talented into it. Then we bleed the enemy with a Rupture. Afterwards, Shadow Dance together with Subtlety into a Gloom Blade into an Eviscerate. Then Shadow Strike, Cold Blood into a Secret Technique, then Symbols of Death. Vanish into a Shadow Strike, then follow up with your priority of Builders and Spenders. Single target openers without First Dance will look something like this. Shadow Strike with any unused trinkets, together with Shadow Blades as well as Gloom Blade into a Flagellation if talented into. Otherwise, Rupture Bleed your enemy. Shadow Dance together with Subtlety into a Shadow Strike, Eviscerate. Shadow Strike, Gloom Blade, Cold Blood into a Secret Technique, followed by Symbols of Death, Vanish, Shadow Strike, then proceed with your ability priority. Your AoE opener inside of Mythic Plus dungeons will work slightly differently. There, we'll start with a Shadow Strike into a Flagellation if you're talented into it, followed by a Rupture. Then we activate Shuriken Tornado, followed by Dance, Shadow Blades, as well as Subtlety. During Tornado, your rogue will automatically start to cast Shuriken Storm every few seconds. During this time, we'll spend our common points on Black Powder, into a Secret Technique, into Black Powder, Symbols of Death, another Black Powder, followed by Shadow Strike, into a Black Powder, and then go on with your ability priority. Next, I want to go over how to properly execute a Shadow Dance window. Every time we use Shadow Dance in combat, we want to maximize the talent of Dance Macabre by using skills in a very specific order, making sure that Secret Technique gains the most benefit out of it with every use. In single target, we'll want to use at least one Gloom Blade during Shadow Dance to stack the dance buff, then proceed with Shadow Strikes as your main builder. Your first finisher will always be Eviscerate, and your second finisher is Secret Technique to maximize its overall dance value. In AoE encounters, you will still want to build common points with Shuriken Storm, where your first finisher will be Black Powder, followed by your second finisher, which will be Secret Technique. Next, I want to go over some of the items worth crafting using the Dragonflight's work order system. Subtlety is a spec which performs better with a stronger weapon, so crafting a high item level dagger with your best secondary stats will always be a viable option. Next, we have the embellishment item of the Slimy Expulsion Boots, which offers quite a bit of single target damage, but it will require you to craft another item with a Toxified Armor Patch embellishment to make it worth your while. It is recommended to craft your armor patch item on a bracer or a belt slot in order to gain maximum value. Lastly, we have the Enchants and Consumables to go over. I will list the recommended consumables from the must-haves first, which will generally offer the most amount of value for the least amount of gold. For your file, we'll use the Tepid Versatility. For runes on your weapons, we'll run the Buzzing rune on each one of your daggers. For food, we'll want to use either a Fortune Cookie, a Rage Feast, or a 1000 Bone Tongue Sizer. If you have the extra gold, you could spend it on Elemental Potions of Power if possible, and try to use it inside of your major cooldowns. Finally, we have Augment Runes, which is the most expensive item in this category. Only use these and purchase these if you're certain that you won't die during the combat encounter, otherwise the runes are wasted. If your character's items have any gem slots in them, then those gem slots should be filled with the Radiant Alexstrasite. At least one of those gem slots should also contain an inscribed limited diamond, if you can get a crafter to make you one using the work order system. And finally, we have our enchantments. Both of your weapons should be enchanted with Sophic Devotion, so purchase the version which you can afford. Chest should be enchanted with Waking Stats. Legs should have the Fierce Armor Kit on them. Rings should be enchanted with Critical Strike. Bracers and Cloak are best enchanted with Avoidance for defense, and boots can be enchanted with the Plains Runner's Breeze for added movement. Finally, your belt can be enchanted with a shadowed clasp, but only if you can afford it. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.